In a Midwestern kitchen, the wooden recipe box is pulled down from the shelf. Its lid sits slightly open, revealing lined index cards with softened corners, stained with grease, carrying the mingled scent of old paper and dried onion. The first card reads, Tater Tot Hotdish, Moorhead, Minnesota, 1959. Ground beef hits hot fat. A low sizzle circles the cast iron skillet. Onion softens, and the smell of browned meat, cream soup, and frozen potatoes draws the room closer together. Today, ground beef often brings burgers or tacos to mind. In a working-class kitchen, 1 pound of meat also went into macaroni, mashed potatoes, rice, cabbage, cornmeal, beans, and oats. She did not need more meat. She needed to know where the ground beef should go. Tater tots cover a baking dish, corn chips break beneath cheese, gelatin molds chill, pies ride in miners' coat pockets, and Johnny Marzetti is served in Columbus. If those kitchens mean something to you, subscribe to Old American Kitchen. Pull your chair closer. Tonight, the recipe box opens to dish number 30, frozen potatoes, cream soap, and the Midwestern casserole pans Moorhead, Minnesota, the winter of 1959. Snow lies low outside the window, and prairie winds sweep across the rooftops near the railroad line. In the kitchen, the mother hears the distant echo of iron wheels. The 2 children set their school books along the edge of the table. In front of her are ground beef, cream soup, macaroni, biscuit mix, cabbage, and a deep glass baking dish. The first 5 dishes belong to those same hands. Dish number 30. Tater Tot Hotdish. The frozen potato nuggets are arranged tightly across the baking dish, like rail cars waiting to leave the station. In 1959, in Moorhead, 1 pound of ground beef, 1 can of cream soup, tater tots, and corn or peas cost about $1.12. She drops an onion into the cast iron skillet. The fat crackles, the onion gradually softens, and then the ground beef is broken apart with a wooden spoon into small brown pieces. She spreads the meat across the bottom of the dish, pours the cream soup over it, and places the potato nuggets close together, one by one. In the oven, the edges of the dish bubble gently, the potatoes turn crisp on top, and the layer underneath stays soft and holds in the steam. From family kitchens to church basements across Minnesota and the Dakotas, the hot dish traveled in a baking dish just like this one. The hot dish quiets the house. Dish number 29, ground beef hot dish. The smell of cream soup and hot macaroni reaches the table before the spoon does. Also in Moorhead in 1959, ground beef, macaroni, canned peas, cream soup, and breadcrumbs made a dinner that cost about 96 cents. She boils the macaroni until just tender, then drains it. Steam adds another layer of fog to the window glass. The ground beef is browned with onion, then mixed with the peas, pasta, and cream soup. Mixture is poured into a deep baking dish and sprinkled with breadcrumbs and the little cheese that remains. In the oven, small bubbles rise around the edges. Hotdish gathers what is left in the cupboard and turns it into a meal with enough for everyone. The baking dish knows how to divide things evenly. Dish number 28. Beef and biscuit ring a ring of golden, risen biscuits around the reddish-brown beef makes a weeknight dinner look more proper. Ground beef, biscuit mix, tomato sauce, onion, and cheese cost about $1.04 in that Moorhead kitchen that year. She browns the meat with onion, then stirs in tomato sauce to keep the filling moist enough. The biscuit mix is quickly prepared, divided into small portions, and arranged around the edge of the baking dish. Meat is spooned into the center. When the oven door closes, the smells of dough, tomato, and beef fat blend. The biscuits rise, holding the steam around the beef filling. This dish suits a church potluck, a neighbor stopping by, or a Wednesday evening that needs to feel like a special occasion. The shape changes the dinner. Dish number 27. Cheeseburger macaroni loaf. The macaroni loaf stands firmly on the plate like a new kind of meatloaf. In 1959, ground beef, macaroni, processed cheese, ketchup, and onion cost about $1.15. She boils the pasta, browns the meat, and then mixes everything with the cheese and ketchup. The mixture is pressed into a greased loaf pan and the back of a spoon pack downs the surface so the loaf will hold its shape. After baking, she lets it rest for a few minutes. The knife passes through the outer layer with a soft scraping sound, revealing macaroni nestled between the meat and cheese. One slice is served hot, another goes into a lunchbox or is reheated in a skillet with a little butter the next day. One loaf. Many meals dish number 26. Cabbage and rice beef bake, thinly sliced cabbage, fills the baking dish before the meat is added. During that same Moorhead winter in 1959, ground beef, cabbage, leftover rice, canned tomatoes, and breadcrumbs cost about 84 cents in total. She drops the cabbage into the skillet with a little beef fat and stirs until the leaves soften. The ground beef is browned separately and mixed with the leftover rice and canned tomatoes. The red color soaks into the grains of rice, while the cabbage holds the meat juices and the smell of onion. Everything is layered in the baking dish, covered with breadcrumbs, and baked until the top sets. When it is spooned out, the soft, sweet cabbage helps 1 pound of meat reach more plates. Cabbage knows how to hold on to flavor. Moorhead winter closes with the sound of a spoon touching the side of the baking dish. Ahead, the pantry of the 1970s will echo with the crunch of breaking corn chips, carrying the red color of ketchup and the smell of dried seasoning. Corn chips, ketchup, and the suppers that had to be done fast from Moorhead. The story moves south to San Antonio, Texas in 1974. The road near the house trembled slightly whenever trucks passed. The grocery store now carried seasoning packets, bags of corn chips, and cans of tomatoes. The 3 children came home at different times. The dinner had to be hot, easy to serve, and ready whenever the door opened. Dish number 25, Mexican high-stack dinner under the yellow light. Each plate was piled high in its own way. About $1.85, she had ground beef, corn chips, lettuce, tomatoes, cheese, and salsa for the whole table. The beef was browned with taco seasoning, the sound of the spoon scraping the bottom of the pan, blending with the traffic outside. She lowered the heat to keep the pot of meat warm, then put down corn chips or rice first. The small bowls came out one by one. Cool, crisp lettuce, juicy tomatoes, shredded cheese, and red salsa. Everyone added whatever they liked. A busy dinner became calm because of a pot of hot meat and a table wide enough for everyone. Dinner built itself on the plate. Dish number 24, corn chip beef bake. Layer broken chips crackled beneath the melting cheese. In that same San Antonio kitchen in 1974, 1 pound of ground beef, half a bag of corn chips, canned tomatoes, taco seasoning, and cheese cost about $1.71. She softened the onion in the beef drippings, then sprinkled in the seasoning. Corn chips were spread across the baking dish. Beef went on top, followed by the canned tomatoes and cheese. In the oven, the chips in the middle absorbed the sauce and softened, while the pieces near the edges stayed crisp. It was a dinner made from exactly what a 1970s pantry held. What remained at the bottom of the chip bag was still enough. Dish number 20. Texas hash. When the lid was lifted from the skillet, steam scented with tomatoes and bell peppers rushed out. Ground beef, rice, canned tomatoes, onion, and bell pepper made a skillet of hash for about $1.05. She browned the beef and added the onion and bell pepper until they were soft and fragrant. The tomatoes and rice were poured in, the lid was closed, and the flame was turned low. While she set the table, the rice quietly absorbed the tomato juices and the flavor of the meat. When the lid was lifted again, the entire skillet had thickened, turned deep red, and stayed warm enough to save a portion for whoever came home late. Beneath the lid, dinner finished itself. Dish number 21, Sloppy Joe Pie. The glossy red beef filling rose beneath a soft golden biscuit topping. That year, ground beef, ketchup, mustard, brown sugar, the biscuit mix cost about 96 cents. She stirred the beef with ketchup, mustard, and a little brown sugar until the sauce clung thickly to every piece of meat. The filling was poured into a baking dish, and spoonfuls of biscuit dough were placed evenly over the top. As it baked, the sweet tomato aroma blended with the smell of the cooking dough, while the biscuit edges turned honey-colored. On days when the bread was gone, Sloppy Joe continued in another form, served with a spoon and eaten with a fork. The baking dish saved the filling. Dish number 21. Baked spaghetti with beef and ketchup. The nearly empty ketchup bottle still turned the entire pot of pasta red. Ground beef, spaghetti, ketchup, onion, and processed cheese cost about $1.12 in total. She boiled the pasta, letting the bubbling water move around the strands of spaghetti, then browned the beef with onion in a skillet beside it. The ketchup was slowly poured in, coating the pasta and beef in a glossy red color familiar to children. The mixture went into a baking dish, was topped with a few slices of cheese, and then went into the oven. When it came out, the top stretched into strings, the pasta at the bottom held onto the sauce, and the sweet smell of onion lingered in the room. Red, soft, and unmistakably Tuesday night. San Antonio closes with the sound of chips breaking, a skillet lid touching the stove, and a ketchup bottle being set on the table. In California, the next cards will place canned pineapple, gelatin, and a large onion beside ground beef, carrying dinner into an era with a new appearance. Canned pineapple, Latin, and the suburban dishes that tried to look new. From the red of ketchup in San Antonio, the story moves west to Oakland, California in 1965. The mother in this kitchen lives with her dockworker family. In the afternoon, ship horns echo from the waterfront, mingling with the sound of freight trucks moving through the streets near the bay. The kitchen is small, but the pantry already has the look of a new era. A can of pineapple sits beside a bottle of soy sauce. A packet of gelatin rests against a chilled mold. Inside the recipe box, a thin advertisement is tucked between cards with softened corners. One card reads, "Sweet and sour beef." The next reads, "Gelatin supper mold." Another shows a hollowed-out onion. The recipe box is opened for the second time, and the next 5 dishes all belong to that mother in her Oakland kitchen in 1965. Dish number 20, pineapple beef bake. The can of pineapple beside the ground beef makes an ordinary evening seem brighter. In Oakland in 1965, ground beef, canned pineapple, soy sauce, bell pepper, and onion made a baked dish that cost about 95 cents. She browns the meat in a skillet, letting the fat pop softly beneath the wooden spoon. The onion and bell pepper are added and gradually soften in the heat. The pineapple slides from the can with its clear juice, and then the soy sauce is poured in as a dark stream. The mixture goes into a baking dish and is baked until the edges of the pineapple are lightly browned, and the sweet and salty sauce clings to the meat. Tiki culture, bourbon potlucks, and pages devoted to creative dinners gave the dish an air of novelty. Even so, her hands still perform the familiar tasks: browning the meat, stirring the sauce, placing the dish in the oven, and waiting for the aroma to spread into the hallway. Pineapple makes the kitchen brighter. Dish number 19, sweet and sour ground beef with pineapple. The scent of sweet pineapple moves through the beef fat and makes the skillet seem lighter. In that same Oakland kitchen, ground beef, canned pineapple, ketchup, vinegar, brown sugar, and rice cost about $1.03 in total. She stirs the meat until brown marks appear across the bottom of the skillet. Ketchup falls in red ribbons. Vinegar meets the heat with a sharp, clean scent. The brown sugar gradually dissolves into the pineapple juice. The sauce is cooked until it turns glossy and coats every piece of meat. She spoons white rice onto the plate first, then places the sweet and sour beef on top. The dish brings a different flavor to the family dinner, using things already waiting in the pantry. Pineapple makes it easier for young children to eat, while the vinegar keeps the sauce from becoming too heavy. But 1 can of pineapple changes the entire plate of rice. Dish number 18, savory ground beef gelatin mold. Under the dining room light, the cold red gelatin mold trembles slightly as the plate is set down. Ground beef, tomato gelatin, celery, onion, and saltine crackers cost about 82 cents in Oakland in 1965. She cooks the meat with celery and onion, then leaves the mixture by the window to cool slightly. The tomato gelatin is stirred until dissolved, then receives the drained meat before being poured into the mold. In the refrigerator, the dish gradually sets. At mealtime, she quickly dips the mold into warm water, turns it out onto a plate, and arranges saltine crackers around the edge. Savory molds once appeared on cold tables, at luncheon clubs, and at meals that needed to be prepared in advance. To the present, the dish seems unfamiliar. To a kitchen in the mid-1960s, it was a genuine part of the era. This card remains in the box. Dish number 17. Bunless burger stuffed onions. On Wednesday evening, 4 large onions stand in the baking dish in place of buns. Ground beef, breadcrumbs, an egg, and tomato sauce make a meal costing exactly $1. She cuts off the tops, hollows out the center of each onion, and places them in a straight row. The ground beef is mixed with breadcrumbs and egg, then gently pressed into the hollow spaces. A thin layer of tomato sauce is spread over the top. In the oven, onion layers soften and release their sweetness into the meat filling, while the sauce boils into small bubbles at the bottom of the dish. The shape of the dish belongs to a suburban kitchen eager to try something new. The technique inside still follows the familiar traditions of meatloaf and stuffed vegetables. The softened onion holds the meat in place. Dish number 16. Ground beef mock chop suey. The scent of celery, meat juices, and soy sauce rises as the skillet is stirred. For about 73 cents, she has ground beef, cabbage, celery, onion, rice, and soy sauce for dinner. The meat is browned first. Thinly sliced celery, onion, and cabbage go in next, making a dry stir-frying sound that gradually softens as the vegetables release their moisture. She pours in a little soy sauce or Worcestershire sauce at the end, stirring just enough for the vegetables to soften while still retaining some crispness. Rice is spooned into bowls, and the meat and vegetables are ladled over the top with a deep serving spoon. The name of the dish suggests a distant flavor, but the cooking method still belongs to the family skillet and hands that know how to control the heat. Familiar ingredients expanded the flavor of an ordinary meal. An unfamiliar name, familiar hands. Oakland holds the most unusual cards in the recipe box. Canned pineapple, red gelatin, hollowed-out onions, and thinly sliced celery. But in Pennsylvania, dinner is about to return to winter, deep pots and ingredients that help 1 pound of meat stretch farther through cabbage, potatoes, rice, and cornmeal. Cabbage, potatoes, rice, and how 1 pound of beef went further. From Oakland's novel recipe cards, the story returns to Johnstown, Pennsylvania, in the winter of 1949. Smoke from the steel mills hung low over the rooftops, while the blast furnaces cast a dim orange glow across the gray sky. At shift change, a factory whistle stretched through the neighborhood before fading among the tightly closed windows. In the kitchen of a steelworker's family, the mother placed ground beef beside cabbage, potatoes, leftover rice, dried beans, canned tomatoes, and a bag of cornmeal. She understood that flavor could be spread evenly throughout an entire baking dish, soup pot, or cast iron skillet. The next 5 dishes were all made by those same hands in the same Johnstown kitchen in 1949. Dish number 15. American style, shepherd pie with ground beef. A layer of mashed potatoes completely covered the remaining meat, trapping beneath it the aroma of browned onions and warm gravy. In Johnstown that year, ground beef, potatoes, onion, leftover vegetables, and milk made a baking dish that cost about 82 cents. She browned the meat with the onion, using a wooden spoon to scrape the darkened bits from the bottom of the skillet, then spread everything into the baking dish. Vegetables from the previous meal were scattered into the empty spaces. The boiled potatoes were mashed with a little milk, then spread in a thick layer over the top. A fork was dragged across the potatoes in long lines so that the small peaks would brown in the oven. When the serving spoon went down, the soft potatoes brought up meat, vegetables, and gravy with them. Every serving carried the flavor of beef, even though no one needed a separate piece of meat on the plate. The potatoes held the whole week together. Dish number 14, bell peppers stuffed with beef and rice. The last peppers from the garden stood upright in the old baking dish, their green color rising against the winter kitchen. For about 91 cents, she had ground beef, rice, 4 peppers, canned tomatoes, and 1 egg. She cut off the tops, removed the seeds, and placed each pepper on a towel to drain. The beef was mixed with the rice and egg, packed just firmly enough for the filling to hold its shape while remaining tender. The canned tomatoes were poured around the bases of the peppers, making a soft trickling sound as they touched the metal baking dish. In the oven, the pepper skins gradually wrinkled, while the aroma of tomatoes blended with the meat and rice. Each pepper formed its own individual serving, with enough shape, color, and weight to fill the palm of a hand. The rice carried the flavor of the meat farther while the plate still looked full. Each pepper held a small meal. Dish number 13, cabbage, bean, and ground beef soup. The pot of cabbage simmered with low, steady sound. Half a pound of ground beef, dried beans, cabbage, onion, and broth cost only about 31 cents in the Johnstown kitchen of 1949. The beans had been soaked the night before, slowly swelling in an enamel bowl near the sink. She simmered them until tender, added thinly sliced cabbage, and let the pot continue breathing beneath its lid. The beef was browned in the skillet beside it and added in just enough quantity for the flavor of the meat to spread throughout the soup. By afternoon, the broth had thickened, the cabbage had become soft and sweet, and the beans nearly dissolved beneath the back of the spoon. The meal was measured by the number of bowls served, by the heat passing through the enamel, and by the slice of bread that absorbed the soup all the way to its edges. A deep pot made dinner last longer. Dish number 12, ground beef with cornmeal dumplings. A layer of white frost still covered the porch when the cornmeal fell into the pot. Ground beef, cornmeal, onion, lard, and broth made a dinner that cost about 44 cents. She browned the meat with the onion in hot lard, then poured in the broth a little at a time. The cornmeal was mixed into a soft dough and dropped onto the surface of the pot in rounded spoonfuls. The lid was put on immediately afterward. Inside, the steam lifted each dumpling while its bottom absorbed the meat juices. She left the pot undisturbed, listening to the simmering trapped beneath the lid. When she opened it, the smell of moist cornmeal and browned onions reached all the way to the door. The dumplings became the softest part of the meal, resting directly on top of the pot of meat instead of being served alongside it. The cornmeal held the steam of the meat. Dish number 11, cabbage and tomato beef skillet. The cabbage turned pale red when the canned tomatoes touched the skillet. That same winter, ground beef, cabbage, tomatoes, onion, and black pepper cost about 58 cents in total. She browned the beef, drained off some of the fat, and left a thin layer across the bottom of the skillet. The onion was stirred until translucent. The shredded cabbage went in next, sizzling briefly before gradually softening. The tomatoes and their red juices were poured in, bringing a mild tangy aroma and a color brighter than the room outside. The skillet was covered until the cabbage absorbed the flavors of the meat and tomatoes. This was a dish for factory towns and small apartments, faster than a pot of soup and more compact than a casserole, but still capable of keeping the whole table warm. Even a small skillet could feed the table. Johnstown had stretched 1 pound of meat through potatoes, rice, cabbage, beans, and cornmeal. The dishes that followed would leave the kitchen table. They would be folded closed, pressed tightly, wrapped in paper, and carried through the long working hours of Michigan's mining country. Minner's lunches, foil-packed the meals that left the kitchen. From the homes of steelworkers in Johnstown, the story moves north to Iron Mountain, Michigan in 1948. Morning in the Upper Peninsula begins while the windows are still dark. Mother stands beneath a low light, listening to the rustle of flour inside a paper bag and the sound of a knife cutting through a potato on the chopping board. On the table are cabbage, onion, ground beef, a roll of wax paper, and the recipe box lying open at the edge of the table. The cards say very little. The rest lies in the way she folds the dough, cuts the potatoes, and tests the heat with her fingertips. All 5 dishes of this wheat belong to the same Iron Mountain kitchen in 1948. Dish number 10, handheld beef and cabbage pies. A still warm wrapped pie is placed in a coat pocket before the miner leaves home. About 64 cents, she has ground beef, cabbage, flour, lard, and onion for the entire batch. The dough is rolled into thin circles. She mixes the meat with finely chopped cabbage and onion and places the filling in the center. The edges of the dough are folded over and pressed tightly with her fingers to keep the meat juices inside. In the oven, the crust gradually dries, turns golden, and releases the smell of baked dough mingled with sweet onion. She leaves the pies to rest on a clean towel until they are cool enough to wrap while the filling still holds its warmth. The food must withstand the journey, metal lunchbox, cold hands, and a short break. When the pie is broken in half, steam rises from the meat, bringing the smell of the kitchen back in the middle of the morning shift. The pie carries the smell of home. Dish number 9. Foil packets with beef, potatoes, and carrots. The foil opens with a sharp rustle, and then a rush of hot steam carries the smell of onion upward first. In that same Iron Mountain kitchen in 1948, ground beef, potatoes, carrots, onion, and foil cost about 79 cents in total. She places a portion of raw meat in the center of each sheet of foil and covers it with sliced potatoes, carrots, and onion. The edges of the foil are folded tightly to hold in the steam. The packet can sit in the oven, on a wood stove, or near hot coals until the potatoes are tender and the meat cooks in its own juices. Each person receives a separate packet, just enough for one meal. When the foil is opened at the right moment, the steam escapes, leaving tender potatoes, translucent onion, and meat that is still juicy. Each packet is a meal of its own. Brown skillet, sunflower seeds, and chili that waited for lat, because it was still Iron Mountain, Michigan, 1948. The same mother was still standing in the kitchen where she had wrapped the previous 2 meals. The cast iron skillet sat on the stove, its bottom darkened by years of exposure to fire. A roll of wax paper still lay open at the edge of the table. In the recipe box, several cards bore fingertip-shaped grease stains and faint pencil writing. Outside, the wind of the Upper Peninsula brushed against the walls of the house. Inside, the remaining dishes had to sustain those who left home early, returned after dark, or ate quickly before the shift whistle sounded. Dish number 8. Wartime ration. Stamps had become less common, but the habits formed during the war years remained in the skillet. In 1948, half a pound of ground beef, potatoes, carrots, oats, and onion made a skillet of hash that cost about 35 cents. She cut the potatoes into small, even cubes. The beef was browned first, then the carrots and onion went into the still hot fat. A small amount of oats was sprinkled in to absorb the meat juices and hold the small pieces together. She pressed the mixture firmly against the surface of the skillet with the back of a spoon, then left it undisturbed. Sizzling gradually softened. The aroma of browned potatoes and sweet onions rose around the stove. When the spatula was slipped underneath, a crisp crust had formed on the bottom. The hash was made from cold potatoes, leftover vegetables, and just enough meat to give the entire skillet the smell of a meal. The secret was to leave it alone. Dish number 7. Beef, potato, sunflower seed hash. The sunflower seeds popped lightly in the hot fat while the potatoes browned around their small, square edges. In Iron Mountain that same year, ground beef, potatoes, onion, and roasted sunflower seeds cost about 68 cents in total. She browned the meat, added diced potatoes and onion, then spread everything into a wide, even layer. The spoon moved through the skillet only a few times, just enough to allow the potatoes to remain in contact with the cast iron. Once the edges were browned, she sprinkled in the sunflower seeds at the end. The small seeds met the hot fat with a dry crackle, releasing a roasted aroma among the soft potatoes. This was a plate meant for early mornings or late nights, when the person eating needed warmth and substance more than appearance. The skillet of hash said little, but the plate usually came back empty. Dish number 6, ground beef and bean chili. After the pot of deep red chili still sat on the stove, heat escaping slowly around the edge of the lid. Ground beef, dried beans, canned tomatoes, onion, and dried chilies cost about 72 cents in the Iron Mountain kitchen of 1948. The beans had been soaked the night before, then simmered until tender. Browned the meat with the onion, added the tomatoes and dried chilies, then poured everything into the pot. The flame was turned low. Over several hours, the chili gradually thickened. The beans became soft and creamy, and the smell of the chilies clung to the sides of the pot and the wooden ladle. The chili in this kitchen tasted warming rather than hot. The beans filled the pot. The beef carried the aroma of the skillet. The tomatoes held everything together in a thick red broth. Whoever came home late could still find a hot bowl waiting. This pot could wait a long time. Iron Mountain preserved its meals with tightly folded dough edges, foil, browned crust at the bottom of the skillet, and the deep pot. As the final cards appeared in the recipe box, the story returned to the Midwest. From here, dinner would also have to carry the memory of the person who once stood beside the stove. Cornbread, pumpkin, oats, and the cards near the bottom of the box. From the miner's kitchen in Iron Mountain, the story returns to the Midwest, to Columbus, Ohio in 1940. Night has fallen over the working-class neighborhood. Mother pulls the recipe box from the shelf for the last time and places it beneath the small lamp on the table. The cards near the bottom bear the traces of more dinners than those lying above them. Cornmeal is caught in one corner of a card. A few dry oats cling to the edge of another. The word chili has blurred into a brown smudge. Near the bottom of the box, the name Johnny Marzati tilts slightly beneath a pencil line. The final 5 dishes all belong to that mother in her Columbus kitchen in 1940. By now, ground beef has taken many forms. In this kitchen, it becomes the way a region holds on to the smell of dinner. Dish number 5, beef, sage, cornbread, bake. The warm scent of sage and wood smoke settles over the golden cornbread before the baking dish is placed on the table. In Columbus in 1940, ground beef, cornmeal, milk, onion, and dried sage made a dinner that cost about 61 cents. She browns the ground beef with onion, gently scraping the bottom of the skillet so the darkened bits blend back into the hot fat. The sage is sprinkled in at that moment. The herbal scent rises, suggesting a Sunday dinner even though the calendar says it is only the middle of the week. The meat is spread across the bottom of the baking dish. In the bowl beside it, she stirs the cornmeal with milk and a little fat and spreads the mixture over the top. In the oven, the surface gradually sets and cracks into fine lines. The cornbread underneath absorbs the meat juices, holding the smell of onion and sage beneath its soft golden layer. Meal has the substance of meat while still providing enough for everyone at the table. Cornbread holds on to the smell of meat. Dish number 4, ground beef stew with roasted squash. A piece of late-season squash gives the pot of meat a gentler color and softer texture than usual. Also in Columbus that year, ground beef, squash, onion broth, and dried herbs cost about 54 cents. She places the pieces of squash in the oven first, waiting for their edges to turn brown and their sweet scent to drift through the kitchen doorway. The ground beef is browned with onion in a deep pot. The squash is then added, followed by the broth, a little at a time. The ladle moves slowly through the pot to keep the pieces of squash from breaking apart too soon. When the heat is lowered, the squash gradually softens, partially dissolving into the meat juices and creating a natural thickness. The stew clings to the spoon, carrying the flavors of onion, herbs, and a touch of sweetness from the late-season garden. Eaten with bread, the dish is thick enough to hold its warmth through a cold evening. Autumn melts into the pot. Dish number 3, burger spoon bread casserole. This dish is served with a large spoon. For about 66 cents, she has ground beef, cornmeal, milk, eggs, onion, and a little pepper for the Columbus casserole of 1940. The ground beef is browned with onion and then spread across the bottom of the baking dish. She stirs the cornmeal, milk, and eggs into a soft mixture, letting the spoon make slow circles in the bowl. The spoon-bread mixture is poured over the meat, filling the empty spaces before the dish goes into the oven. The top rises slightly, softer than ordinary cornbread, and trembles gently when the dish is set down. Spoon bread lies somewhere between bread and pudding, creating a dinner that is slow, soft, and quiet. When the spoon goes down, the cornmeal layer parts and pulls up the meat and onion beneath it. The spoon goes down very slowly. After the spoon bread, only two important cards remain in the recipe box. One preserves the way oats and a pair of hands help a loaf stand firm. The final card bears the name of a casserole that began in Columbus and remained in the memory of many Midwestern kitchens. Oats, macaroni, and the casserole that stayed the longest. It was still the Columbus, Ohio, kitchen in 1940. The same mother stood beside the old table. The sounds in the room gradually grew quieter. The beef met the skillet with a low sizzle. Macaroni dropped into the boiling water with soft plopping sounds. A wooden spoon scraped across the bottom of the pot, while the lid of the recipe box lightly touched the tabletop. The final two cards lay beneath the lamp. Dish number 2, ground beef and oat. The oats fell into the bowl in a dry, light layer, then disappeared among the beef, egg, and onion. In Columbus in 1940, those ingredients, along with ketchup, it cost about 52 cents in total. She mixed everything by hand, turning the bowl so the oats were distributed evenly throughout the meat. Her fingers stopped when the moisture felt just right and the mixture began to hold its shape. She formed the meat into a loaf, placed it in a loaf pan, and spread a thin layer of ketchup over the top. In the oven, the oats absorbed the meat juices, kept the inside tender, and helped each slice stand firm when the knife went down. Oatloaf made sure there was enough dinner to go around while preserving its moisture and shape. She knew the mixture was right by its weight, its stickiness, and the way it felt beneath her palm. She measured with the palm of her hand. Dish number 1, Johnny Marzetti, casserole. The cheese bubbled into brown blisters around the edges of the tin baking dish. For about 75 cents in Columbus in 1940, 1 pound of ground beef, elbow macaroni, tomato sauce, onion, and cheese could feed the entire table. She browned the beef with the onion while the macaroni cooked in the pot beside it. The pasta was drained, mixed with the meat and tomato sauce, then poured into the baking dish. Cheese covered the top, gradually softening in the oven until the edges of the dish bubbled, and the smell of tomatoes filled the room. She let the casserole rest for a few minutes before serving, so the first portion would hold its shape. Johnny Marzetti traveled from Columbus to Sunday tables, potlucks, and after-shift dinners throughout the Midwest. The dish could be served hot, reheated the next day, and still carry the aroma of the old kitchen. The entire Midwest rested inside that baking dish. The final 5 dishes had passed through cornmeal, pumpkin, spoon bread, oats, and macaroni. The ground beef had now become the way the kitchen remembered the hands that once stood beside the skillet. The final baking dish had cooled. Along that journey, tater tots had once rested in neat rows over the potatoes. The can opener had lifted the lid from a can of cream soup. Corn chips had broken beneath hot cheese, and canned pineapple had slid into the skillet with the sound of fruit juice meeting fat. The gelatin mold trembled lightly on the cold table. Cabbage softened in a deep pot. Cornmeal swelled above the meat juices. Foil opened and released a rush of onion-scented steam. Red macaroni curled around the wooden spoon while the cheese browned along the edges of the Johnny Marzetti. 30 dishes told the story of how the kitchen knew how to brown, thicken, cover, stretch, wrap tightly, divide evenly. She did not need more meat. She needed to know where the ground beef should go. The card labeled Tater Tot Hotdish, Moorhead, Minnesota, 1959, rested near the top. The card labeled Johnny Marzetti, Columbus, Ohio, 1940, was placed back near the bottom of the box, beside an old tomato sauce stain and a trace of cornmeal left behind. The lid of the box slowly came down. One corner of a card still showed. The box was always opened at dinner time. If your family ever cooked one of these dishes, leave its name in the comments and subscribe to Old American Kitchen. Some recipes are still waiting to be called by their proper names again.